At 40, Kafka, who never married and had no children, walked through the park in Berlin when he met a crying girl who had just lost her favorite doll. They both searched for the doll unsuccessfully. Kafka told her to meet him there the next day, and they would come back to look for her. The next day, after not finding the doll, Kafka gave the girl a letter written by the doll saying, "Please don't cry. I took a trip to see the world. I will write to you about my adventures." Thus began a story that continued until the end of Kafka's life. During their meetings at the park, Kafka read the letters of the doll, carefully written with adventures and conversations that the girl found adorable. Finally, Kafka brought back the doll. He bought one that had returned to Berlin. "It doesn't look like my doll at all," said the girl. Kafka handed her another letter in which the doll wrote, "My travels have changed me." The little girl hugged the new doll and brought her happily home. A year later, Kafka died. Decades later, the now adult girl found a letter inside the doll. In the tiny letter signed by Kafka, it was written, "Everything you love will probably be lost, but in the end, love will return in another way." Of course, since Kafka was a modern Gnostic, as many scholars have contended, I would say there is another lesson to this story beyond the return of love. And that is that Kafka was simultaneously himself the doll and the little girl. He was in his own gospel and own myth, as nobody really has ever verified this story. But we do know that when we fall into a nice fiction, our own stories, we are everyone we meet, and our psyches will often fragment to survive the archons of hell world and to create better than the creator gods and their Karens and catamites in the establishment. And there you have it. I hope you liked my little short to start this episode. And you maybe wonder, what does it have to do with the topic? Well, people, it's all stories. It's all one great story. As Doctor Who said, our souls are not made of matter, they're made of stories. And our topic today, I would argue, might be the greatest story of all. The story of our consciousness and our place in the cosmos, found everywhere in so many grand myths and even in our daily lives and happening through us through the cosmic rays. My name is Miguel Connor. I am not Kafka's doll, and I am so happy to see you as you arrive to the virtual Alexandria to Aeon Byte. Welcome everybody to the desert of the real. Welcome to this Philip K. Dick world, these Gnostic times, and this age of Hermes, where you come to find out who you really are and what reality is not. And I hope that you are writing your own gospel and living your own myth. Good to see everybody going in the chat, and good to see you however you are listening to this content, even though it's live on this Venus day. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Dr. Heather Ensworth to discuss a book I think was amazing and again offers a grand narrative and the way out personally and as a species through these times. And that book is Astrological Ages and the Galactic Center, Ancient Wisdom for this Time of Transition. Heather, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Oh, me. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here too. I think you froze, unless I'm the one seeing it. Vance, do you see anything, any glitching on your side, or was it
Yeah,
just...
Yeah, Heather, yeah, you had a temporary network glitch. So
Oh, well.
I heard you said it was great to be here.
We'll assume you said that and not something else.
No, she said that. I heard that.
Okay, good. All right, well, thanks for joining us too, Vance. And for the audience, as always, if you have any questions for Heather, please super chat them. Of course, if you are a member, whether it's YouTube or Patreon, we will get to your questions or remarks and so forth. So let's start, not maybe the beginning of the universe, Heather, but let's talk about the beginning of this book. How did you come to write this work?
So I've been working on this book for many years. My original background before moving into clinical psychology and ultimately astrology was in cultural anthropology. And I've traveled the world visiting many ancient sacred sites and was impressed by the level of sophistication and consciousness that I perceived in some of these ancient sites dating back up to 12,000 years ago. And I started to realize our whole modern Western sense of history and our development of consciousness as humanity is not accurate. And that led me into increasing exploration of the astrological ages and their meaning, how that correlates with the Hindu Yuga cycle, and that deeper awareness that we as humanity go through cycles of ascending consciousness and descending consciousness and move through these different astrological ages that are really the stories, the lens through which we perceive reality in that 2,000-year time frame.
For sure, yeah. You talk about, I guess, do a little mathing here. The precession cycles are 24,000 years, and are we what, now entering the age of Aquarius? What does that mean? What are the precession cycles for the uninitiated out there?
So, what's extraordinary is the precessional cycle relates to 12,000 years of ascending consciousness, then 12,000 years of descending consciousness. It is a 24,000-year cycle, with each astrological age being about 2,000 years. And it's likely that the precessional cycle is related to our being part of a binary star system. I believe, like Walter Cruttenden's theory, that we move through these different phases because we are circling a binary star, which I believe is the star Sirius, the star in our sky. And we move through these different times where the ages are configured by what constellation on the ecliptic is rising before the sun at the time of spring equinox here in the northern hemisphere, the autumn equinox in the southern hemisphere. And that then, the energies of that constellation affect our consciousness and the ways in which we perceive our reality and our level of consciousness. And so we go through these different phases, but what's so powerful is we're now not only moving out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, we're at the end of one precessional cycle and the beginning of a new one. So it's a very profound time on the planet, because as the research would indicate, every midpoint in the precessional cycle and end of one, beginning of another, is a time of earth changes and radical shifts in human consciousness. So that's the time that we're in now, and why it's such a profound time on the planet.
Yeah, very tense time, as everybody would notice. Yeah, it is interesting because, as you write and as I've known, most suns out there in the galaxy, in the universe, have a twin, right? So it would be pretty I think 90% or more, so it would be logical.
80%.
And I'm sure you've noticed too, the myth of the twin is so important. There's a dead twin, a live twin. I talk about Elvis and his dead twin. So it's almost like these myths are telling us we're missing a twin, right?
That's a very good point, but you're right. 80% of the stars in the galaxy have a binary star. It's highly likely that we do also.
Yeah, and it would, from a psychological, mythological stance, it would help us to see this missing twin, if you would, right?
Well, and it really reframes our whole understanding of reality. If
Yeah,
we're
really.
not a solar system circling the solar hero, we're actually in an ongoing dynamic and relationship with this binary star.
Hmm. Yeah, it would make a big difference. So every 24,000 years, do we know what happened 24,000 years ago? Was there a big tension, or were people fighting over the Strait of Hormuz back then? 24.
What we do know from the archaeological and historical evidence is that there was a huge cataclysm 12,000 years ago, which was the Younger Dryas period. And that was a time where we had massive flooding on the planet, earthquakes. It was a time of cataclysmic change. And that happens every 12,000 years on the planet. And the Hindu Yuga cycle talks about it being an alternating time of a crisis with water or a crisis by fire. So in that the Younger Dryas period was the crisis by fire, this potential time of earth changes is related to fire and may be related to the possibility of a comet strike or a massive solar flare. And it was a comet strike that triggered the Younger Dryas crisis 12,000 years ago. But part of why we go through these 12,000 year cycles is that's the time frame within which we go through the galactic current sheet and go through the Taurid comet swarm, the part of the comets where we're being exposed to the largest ones in that Taurid stream that have the capacity to cause harm to the Earth.
No, makes sense. God, I'm thinking of Robert Frost's poem, Fire and Ice. It will be either fire or ice, right?
Good point.
And the traditional explanation talks about a wobble in the Earth's axis, but how do you depart from that and Newton and all those mathematicians?
Well, that's the solar lunar theory, and it is the traditional view, but Walter Cruttenden has done some really fascinating research showing that understanding that we have a binary star actually fits with the scientific evidence about the precessional cycle in a more accurate way. And again, in that most of the stars in the galaxy are binary stars, that makes more sense. And it's also possible that activity from the Galactic Center may also affect our shifts in consciousness and come into play with the precessional cycle.
No, that makes perfect sense for sure. And I think you're right. You're right that the Kali Yuga officially started in March of 2025, or the end. Is that
The end of the Kali Yuga came in March of 2025. I've really integrated in my book some of the research done by Bibhu Dev Misra, who's done a phenomenal deep dive into the Hindu Yuga cycle in his book, Yuga Shift. And he really charts the end of the Kali Yuga being in March of 2025, which means we're coming out of that 6,000 years of being in our lowest level of consciousness to now be in an accelerated time of change, which is what we're feeling on the planet right now. But again, it calls into question our modern Western understanding of history, which would be that modern civilization started about 6,000 years ago, and we've been on a path of linear progression ever since. Instead, when you really understand the precessional cycle and the Hindu Yuga cycle, you realize, oh, we are actually coming out of a time of disconnection
Mm.
of destruction with these power over paradigms and the ways in which we have gotten caught in scientific materialism and a disconnection from the consciousness of the cosmos,
Right.
to be coming back into the capacity of reclaiming our higher consciousness and understanding again.
Yeah, so in a way, it's good news. I love how you write that we assume we're smarter than ever. Although, if you go on social media, you'd be like, no, we're actually getting dumber. But as you write, people probably were smarter back in the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. When you really visit some of these ancient sites dating back 12,000 years and the sophistication, for example, of the building of the Great Pyramid or Göbekli Tepe, we can't comprehend the technological understanding and mathematical and astronomical understanding of those cultures. So we're in a time now where we have the capacity, I think, to begin to remember some of those things that we've forgotten.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it really is something else. So, and as you write too, these monuments, Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids, and all that, they were just not their use was in a way to warn us about what was happening and to warn us modern people, right? Like Göbekli Tepe is always like, oh man, you spent all this time building this, and then you just grabbed a shovel and buried it all. S- the, Tell the audience how you explain what these monuments really significant, what they mean.
Signify.
I'm getting excited here.
Well, that is so true. I think they, in a way, are messages in stone, and
Mhm.
they are referring in significant ways with astronomical and astrological information to the time at which they were built and this time of cataclysm. Göbekli Tepe really charts the time of the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas period in the symbolism on Pillar 43 in particular. And the Great Pyramid is also showing significant star alignments with the stars of this time. So it's as if those ancient advanced cultures were trying to communicate to us 12,000 years later, this is a critical time on the planet. This is a critical karmic choice point where you either have this opportunity to open to higher consciousness again, or you face the potential of another cataclysmic crisis.
Mhm. And what do you think? Do you think, when you talk about consciousness, are you talking about human consciousness, or are you accepted that there is always a possibility? Will you wiped off the board and something else will have to come along?
My hope, my work, my mission is to energize our possibility as humanity to make this shift. And I've studied with the Peruvian shamans who talk about this critical time of change. And they talk about how if there are even a minority of us that open up to higher consciousness, that can affect the morphogenic field and change the consciousness of the world. But I think it's up to each of us individually what choice we make. And my sense is either there will be enough of us that will support this evolutionary leap, or we'll most likely experience a dimensional divide where those on a path of consciousness are moving into a higher dimensional reality, and those that are open to making this shift may stay in this third dimensional reality and experience that cataclysmic reset.
Mm. No, makes sense. And going back in time, could you explain again to archaeology and myths? Could you explain how the ancient Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris encode information about these astronomical cycles?
It's very dear to my heart. Yes. I mean, I think what we have forgotten in our modern Western cultures is how so many of these ancient myths were speaking to historical events, but also astronomical and astrological events. And when you really look at the story of Isis and Osiris, it is about these two benevolent leaders who are guiding people in living in harmony with all that is, a path of higher consciousness. But then the story unfolds to talk about how Osiris's brother Set, and Set, the name means chaos, disorder, is operating out of ego, wants the power that his brother has, gets in conflict with him, ends up trying to kill him, kills him, then later chops him up into pieces. But over and over again, Isis comes to heal him, revive him, restore him, bring him back to life again. And if you think about how the star Sirius has been associated in ancient Egypt and other cultures with Isis, then it's really speaking to how our binary star takes us through these cycles where we're living in higher consciousness, then we get in conflict with each other, get caught in chaos and disorder, in these destructive patterns. But she then continues to guide us through that cycle, to heal us, restore us, give us another opportunity.
Hail Isis. And as you write, Set is linear time, rational thinking, but he doesn't work alone, doesn't he, Heather? He has what, 72 co-conspirators?
He has 72 co-conspirators who work with him to kill Osiris. And 72 is a very significant number because it's associated with the precessional cycle. Our experience of the movement of the precessional cycle is that from our Earth perspective, the stars, the fixed stars, move 1 degree every 72 years. Mm-hmm. So the story is actually encoding references to the precessional cycle.
Yeah, they, like you said, they knew more than we think, and they were certainly more connected to the cosmos, to those places beyond time. You also talk a lot about the Galactic Center. Why is the Galactic Center important in your work and your thesis, Heather?
Well, if you think about the Galactic Center as the birth of our galaxy, it is the center, the source. And so many cultures have myths, stories of the world tree, of our connection to that source, the Galactic Center. It's often referred to also as the second sun. It is not only the birthplace of our galaxy, but there is increasing evidence that there are periods of time where the Galactic Center activates and sends out these cosmic energies that are also part of what heightened our consciousness as humanity. And amazingly enough, the Galactic Center has reactivated as of 2024. So we're getting so many signs and messages from the cosmos that this is a time of significant change where we have this possibility for moving through a major quantum leap in our consciousness.
Yeah, definitely a time of transition. That's why, Heather, I call this the Age of Hermes, because these trickster gods are gods of transition, whether we like it or not. It may seem weird, but they're here to guide us. The door hinge belongs to Hermes. Hermes will lead the way or lead astray. And of course, pick your own trickster god, Hecate, Coyote. But I think I would agree with you too. Well, let me bring in Vance. Any questions, or do you have any questions on your side of the galaxy, Vance?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I got a whole pile of them here. I was wondering, do you have any thoughts about the role of Sirius in terms of spirituality? Like, do souls emanate from Sirius and, travel between Sirius and our sun?
I mean, that's a great question, Vance. I mean, I do believe we have had in the past so many connections with other extraterrestrial beings. And I believe that we're getting a lot of support from those galactic beings right now to support us in this transition. Most likely from Sirius, also, I believe from the Pleiades in particular. So I am sure that we have had, and I do believe in our times of higher consciousness, we're more capable of direct communication and interaction with these extraterrestrial beings. But as we move into lower consciousness and have lost our own connection with the consciousness of the cosmos, I think then we lose that ability to be in direct communication with galactic beings who are operating at a higher level of consciousness.
Yeah, like the doggone knew of Sirius B, for example. That's a pretty well-known example.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Sirius was honored in so many ancient cultures.
And so, in terms of something you said before, do you think that maybe humanity in general, as an average, the consciousness is going, cycling down and up, but are there sub-cycles within humanity, like groups that actually aren't subject to the same, decrease in consciousness or increase in consciousness? Is there a group of people that are increasing in consciousness these days?
Well, I think that's a great question, Vance. I actually think right now, in this time of change that we're in, it's a time of accelerated possibility of healing, transformation, movement into higher consciousness. I see that in interaction with so many of the people in my community and in other communities. But I also think that as we move through this precessional cycle, it's like a spiral. We're moving through these periods of ascending and descending consciousness in an ongoing process of growing and changing as humanity. But I also believe even in the times of the lowest level of consciousness, we have teachers, guides, people operating at higher levels of consciousness. Buddha, Christ, Krishna, so many others who are trying to seed that higher consciousness or help us remember what we're capable of in the midst of those low times.
Yeah, they must be immune to these cycles then. They're constants.
Well, and I also think, and this is part of what I talk about at the end of the book, if we can really work this journey and honor the lessons of the full precessional cycle and come to center, much like the indigenous people talk about with working the medicine wheel process, then we can step off that wheel of samsara and not have to keep moving through these cycles of ascending and descending consciousness. We have the capacity then to stay centered, stay connected with source, with cosmic consciousness, and stay in that higher awareness.
Thank you. Look, I was wondering how long it would take somebody to do that, and it had to be Graham. Somebody was going to use a serious pun, and we have Graham, my other wingman. I was like, it was inevitable, right?
He's our shining star, isn't he?
Oh no, here we go. I've opened the floodgates for bad puns. But yeah, for everybody we have Dr. Heather Ensworth discussing her amazing book, Astrological Ages and the Galactic Center. This is an open podcast, but as always, please support AM Byte in any way you can. If you like the content support, you will get Gnostic takes and guests you won't get anywhere else on the internet. Next week, I am joined by Kevin Can. His new book on UFOs is probably the best book I've read on UFOs since Jason's Closer Encounters. So prepare to have all your myths and beliefs in UFOs debunked, because it's a 600-page book, but that will be a private stream. I will be doing also a private stream on Gnostic chants and vowels. So you want to communicate with those higher powers, I will bring you the dope on how the ancient Gnostics did it. And you won't be surprised. It comes from the Egyptians because that's where the Gnostics came from. But Very, very cool magic stuff and how to get yourself into an ecstatic state. And speaking of Graham and his puns, he will be doing his presentation on the higher level astrological occult side of, yes, Charlie Kirk, the Vegas shooter, Epstein. We got to do a conspiracy theory, and Graham is going to bring you data that will blow your mind away for sure. So yes, support AM Byte to keep this going, and there will be an audio bonus for all members on this particular podcast. So Heather, that's, I guess, the question. You're saying, what can we do as individuals? I would say know thyself is always my answer from the Temple of Delphi. But as you say, what can we do to keep our consciousness up? You said honor the gifts and the warnings of the ancients, or what else can we do to get our consciousness up and hopefully bring more people to awaken?
Part of what I find truly remarkable is that the Earth herself is in a process of transformation right now.
Mm-hmm.
We are getting all of these messages and support from the cosmos, where we've been going through this galactic current sheet. So our magnetic field around the Earth is lower than usual. We're getting more affected by solar energies coming in and these solar flares, which I think activate the pineal gland, heighten our consciousness. The Galactic Center has reactivated. We had this extraordinary visitation by 3-Eye Atlas, which I think was an interstellar being coming through to again activate higher consciousness in our solar system. So I think part of what we're being called to do is open to coming back into relationship with the Earth, with the cosmos, with the consciousness of everything around us. That then allows us to receive these messages and energies coming to us to heal. I think a lot of what's brought us into disconnection is the trauma that we've been through as humanity, particularly in the last 6,000 years. So the more that we can work that healing process, and we're getting a lot of support to do that right now, the more then we can come back to center, come back to our hearts, because it's through our hearts, not our minds, but through our hearts that we can open to that consciousness of the cosmos and open to that higher consciousness.
Beautifully said. Yeah, you also draw from the work of Barbara Hand Clough and her ideas of 9 dimensions of consciousness. So that's helpful too, right?
Yeah, Barbara Hand Clough's work is great. And she talks a lot about how the 5th dimension, which is the process that we're being called into now, is connected with our hearts. And once you open your heart and move into that higher consciousness, you can access those higher levels.
Mm.
But she's also written a book. It's now called Awakening the Planetary Mind, but it was originally called Catastrophobia. And one of the themes in that book is that it is the cataclysmic trauma that happened 12,000 years ago that's still in our cellular memory,
Right,
that can keep us caught in trauma. Or when you don't bring something, I know this is a clinical psychologist, when you don't bring the trauma into conscious awareness, your tendency is to stay caught in it and reenact it. So part of what's critical for us collectively is to see this larger cycle that we've been in, to not be caught in unconscious fear about what happened 12,000 years ago, but to see clearly what the opportunity is now to move into higher consciousness.
Oh yeah, agreed 100%. Epigenetics, we don't forget anything. I think, as you probably agree with what Jung said, if we don't face our unconscious, it will appear to us as fate, like complex as shadow.
Yes.
We can't figure it out on a collective personal level. So
Well
very
said.
important.
And from a shamanic perspective, we carry those memories of the traumas in our chakras. So then we're literally walking into our past and the trauma in our daily lives until we clear that from our energy bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And of course, the Gnostics and the Buddhists would say trauma, being born is traumatic. Just we're in this lagoon and suddenly we're thrown into this world on this mission we barely know about. So yeah, it's all traumatic. And one avenue that you do offer, Heather, and that's of the healing centaur, of course, Chiron, known as the great wounded healer. I'm not familiar with Charlie Clo that much,
Share,
but those, yeah,
share flow.
yeah, those are the ideas. And of course, I wrote a book about Elvis. I've got one on Bowie coming later this year. I've written about Jim Morrison. Those are the wounded healers we know, the tragic singer and, Sylvia Plath. You know the character, but tell us about how this wounded healer Chiron can help us.
Well, Chiron in our charts shows us where we carry our earliest wounds.
Mm.
And again, as you said so clearly, when we can bring that into conscious awareness, we're no longer controlled by that trauma from the past. We're able to heal it and move more into the fullness of who we are. And then Chiron becomes our healing gifts. But again, these healing centaurs, which are these planetary bodies that move, Chiron moves between Saturn and Uranus, and they all move in these outer orbits between Saturn and some of the outermost planets. They're actively trying to support us in being in the healing process right now, not only healing our own individual wounds, but healing our ancestral trauma and clearing these generational patterns that are part of what keep us caught in these destructive, out of balance patterns.
Amen. Amen. That's 100%. And speaking of sort of gods and myths, I love the goddess Sedna, which I had no idea about, but I found her extremely fascinating. Could you tell the audience about Sedna? And apologies if I'm mispronouncing her name.
No, that's correct. Sedna is this extraordinary planet with an 11,400 years or 400-year orbit.
Wow.
She extends all the way out to the inner Oort cloud, so she communes with the other stars. Then she comes back in at her closest to our solar system, where she is now. Her orbit correlates with close to half of the precessional cycle. So I think she's a messenger of these times of big shift in our precessional cycle when she comes in close to our solar system. But she's named after the Inuit goddess of the deep sea. And that is an extraordinary story about this young Inuit maiden who ends up being on a path of spiritual initiation and transformation, leaving her village, ending up following this mysterious stranger who ends up taking her to a remote island and removes his hood, and she realizes she's with Raven, the Inuit shaman teacher. And she's then on this path of spiritual transformation. And her father comes, and this is so symbolic of this time. Her father comes and tries to force her to come back to the village, to come back to the conventional ways of being as a young maiden in the Inuit culture. And she realizes once you're on a path of spiritual initiation, you can't go home again. But he forces her into the boat, and Raven then sees what's happening, sets off a storm. And the father, in his fear, throws Sedna overboard. Here, take her, save my life. And when she tries to get back in the boat, he literally hits her hands with his paddle, breaking off her fingers, which then dissolve and become the seals and the whales. And I think there's a critical moment in that story where Sedna realizes there is no safety in the boat. And as Jung said, when you're falling, dive. And I think she dives beneath the surface of the stormy sea into the calm, deep sea. And that's the point at which she dissolves and becomes the goddess of the sea. So it's such a story about this time and our need to not cling to the paradigms and patterns of the past that we think give us a sense of security or stability. But to allow ourselves to be in this transition time, to dissolve, to be in the mystery, to go through a transmutational process into whole new ways of being human.
Mhm. Beautifully said, and what a wonderful story. I'm not crying, you're crying, Vance, but do you have a question?
Yeah, yeah. Is this related to the Sumerian Nibiru because the ninth planet and all that?
Oh, very good question. No, she's further out than Nibiru is thought to be, but that's still such a mystery in terms of its visitations and how it brings times of change.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're aware that astronomers have detected a planet far out in the solar system. Is that Sedna or Nibiru or something else?
Planet X, there's still, I mean,
Right.
there is still at least that planet, if not others, that are yet to be discovered. And I think that's part of what's extraordinary right now is we're more rapidly identifying some of these planetary bodies that are further and further out in our solar system, like the Kuiper Belt objects, the
Mhm.
trans-Neptunian planetary bodies.
Right.
Yeah, I've
And
given up. How do you define a planet? Because Pluto, I don't remember the argument, but there are objects as big as Pluto around that area. So I'm like, I give up.
yes, that is correct. That is absolutely correct.
Yeah, I think it's politics, planetary politics.
Well, do you know in that 2006 meeting of the International Astronomers Union, I think it's so interesting that that's when they demoted Pluto. Of course, they
Mm.
demoted Pluto when Pluto was in alignment with the Galactic Center, so in a position of power. But part of their explanation of what should define a planet was that it should be fairly round in shape, orbit the sun. But here's the really interesting one: it should be a big enough, basically, bully in its neighborhood that it is able to be in its own orbit without sharing it with any other planets.
Hmm.
If that isn't a patriarchal
Yeah.
paradigm, so Pluto, that can share part of its orbit with Neptune, got demoted somehow to be able to be collaborative and in relationship and in community was problematic. You needed to be the hero, the conqueror of your own domain.
So speaking of patriarchal, so size doesn't matter? You know, is there a size to this planet? It has to be X amount of I don't know what, or
They do look at a particular size as well because, for
Or
example,
gravitational.
you've got the whole asteroid belt with all of these
yeah.
fragmentary bodies. But they at that time they were trying to decide, is Ceres the largest asteroid? Should that be classified as a planet?
Right.
Why not?
Yeah.
Well, I'm seeing that there's a huge common idea here, which is influence, right? When we're talking about astrology, we're talking about influence. We're talking about the influence of the planets in our lives, the influence of Sirius, and so forth and so on. But if you look at what the scientists say, and they are looking at strictly material world, they judge influence by gravity, right? Just like we were saying with Pluto and Neptune and so forth. But that's in the physical material world dimension. But doesn't that imply that the spiritual world has a separate dimension where the distance between things is not the same as it appears in the material world? Like Sirius and our sun would have a closer spiritual distance, and to us as well, in the spiritual dimension than it does in the material dimension. Because the material dimension, Sirius is far enough away so that gravitationally it doesn't have an influence, but in the spiritual world, it must be a lot closer to us.
Well, that's beautifully said. And I also think that my understanding of astrology is that we're not controlled by these planetary movements or where they are in relationship to us, that the movements of the planets are reflecting the energies active in the cosmos and are mirroring that. and guiding us to see more clearly what that process is that we're meant to be aware of and to be working at a conscious level. So for me, the understanding of quantum physics, of consciousness, when you realize everything has consciousness, then we can be in relationship with and influenced by and in dynamics with these planets and stars, no matter how close or far away they are. They're all in us as well as outside of us, which would be a Gnostic perspective, I would think.
Definitely. As above, so below. As within, so
All right.
without. The macrocosm is the microcosm. It's all in your head. You just don't realize how big your head is, as Lon Milo Duquette famously said.
Yes, exactly.
Our consciousness can spread to the nearest star in a split second, right, Heather? With the right training. So.
Exactly. And I think in the ancient times, they traveled to other star systems and interacted with other galactic beings through their consciousness, not through technology.
Yeah, I think my dream would to do that and go to that place where Kirk is fighting that lizard man, the bad suit. Remember that episode?
I remember that. I'm a
It stayed with me forever. I loved it, but I also knew how hokey it was, but I still loved it. It's like, well, more.
That's great.
Yeah, it's something else. And Heather, have you always been mystic oriented, or did you go through a period, a conversion? What's your story been like in your journey?
I actually came in as a young child. My parents would tell these stories about how when I was 3, I would follow them around the house and say, "What happens after we die?"
Already at 3.
So.
Did she freeze or did I freeze? Hold on.
Yeah, a little
Heather,
network glitch here.
Yeah, glitch. We might have to back up.
Whoop.
Okay.
All right, you're back.
Yeah. You might have to back up after 3. You told your parents about death. What did you say after that, since we lost you for about 5 seconds?
So I've really been on a spiritual path since early childhood. And then when I was 38, I had a very powerful mystical experience where I heard this voice within me say, "You need to leave your life as you've known it, or you will die." And that was a critical turning point in my life then, to really move even deeper onto my spiritual path. And that's when I actively started exploring these ancient healing and wisdom traditions and started doing a deeper dive into all of this research.
Amazing. And you've traveled to all these amazing places. Do you have a favorite of all the ancient archaeology you visited, or places in the world that really speaks to you?
Well, I do have a deep connection with ancient Egypt, and I've led many group trips there now to the ancient sacred sites in Egypt. I've also been profoundly moved by the ancient sites in Peru. But there are so many ancient sites in India, in Africa, in all parts of the world. I've been to Göbekli Tepe, which is extraordinary.
Wow.
So I'm really interested in those most ancient sites that hold some of those messages of higher consciousness.
Yeah. At the same time, God, and I know this is always a sticking point. I don't think it's a sticking point because I don't judge. I don't believe in presentism, like I'm better. But the one thing that the ancients did, which you have to give it to Christianity and Zoroastrianism, is they got rid of human sacrifice, which was prevalent in all these places. So even the natives in the Southwest were doing human sacrifice and all that. Why do you think, have you encountered the issue? Why were they doing human sacrifice? Did they really think this really fueled the cosmos, or?
I don't believe in those very ancient cultures that existed at all.
Really?
But my sense is that in the age of Taurus, which is when we started into the Kali Yuga, not only do we have these earth crises every 12,000 years, but then we have other crises every 6,000 years. And there were a number of earth changes, climate crisis 6,000 years ago that led, I think, to a lot of fear and survival mentality.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's very interesting in the astrological ages is the second half of the age, the 2,000-year period, is influenced and governed by the sign opposite. So the second half of the age of Taurus is the age of Scorpio.
Mm.
And what I find in my research is so many ancient cultures around that time got caught in an obsession around death, fear of death. How do we avoid death? So I think that's when we start seeing human sacrifice. That's also when the Egyptians got very caught up in mummification. How do we preserve ourselves and protect ourselves and prepare for the afterlife? So I think that it's that fear of death that can lead, again, the trauma leads to these kinds of behaviors.
No, I think it's well said. I mean, look at the Epic of Gilgamesh. What's Gilgamesh saying? And it's not money, fame, or fortune. It's how do I conquer death? That's his concern the whole time.
Yeah, his search for eternal life.
Right. So something was going on there. Very interesting, and makes perfect sense. And yeah, as we get to the end, I guess my last question, which I thought was fascinating: how does the discovery of the dwarf planet Eris Xena challenge our cultural conditioning? Tell the audience about Eris Xena.
I love this planet. And part of what's extraordinary about the planet and why it wasn't discovered for so long is because her orbit is 44 degrees off the ecliptic. So most of the planets in our solar system follow that same path, the path of the ecliptic. So she's off that beaten path. She was part of the activation for that whole controversy over what defines a planet. And part of what I find really interesting is when I've done research on that planet and when it's strong in people's charts, it's strong in the charts of artists, innovators, pioneers, creatives, people who dare to step off the conventional path and follow their own spiritual, creative path and purpose. But the discovery of Eris Xena led to such controversy among the astronomers in their fight to determine what constitutes a planet that they labeled her Eris after the goddess of strife and discord. But that's not a reflection of her energy. It's a projection of their conflict and how we tend to react to those who dare to step off the conventional path. But she can guide us in how to move in new directions. And she's moving in the sky right now with Chiron, guiding us to heal, to release the patterns from the past so that we're capable of moving in radically new directions.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. All these stories in the stars and messages. It's all right there for us. And definitely check out Heather's book because you will get a lot of insights on our place and the messages and everything else. And we are getting to the end. Vance, do you have any last question for Heather?
Oh, yes, I do. So I know we're trying to get to the end, but I'm afraid if I ask this, we might not be as close as you think. What about Alpha Centauri and Proxima Centauri? Do they? Why doesn't anybody talk about those?
That's a good question. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, that's why I'm asking you.
Same committee who got rid of Pluto and Eris. They got rid of Alpha Centauri, which used to be on every science fiction show in the 70s, right?
Yeah, I can't answer that one, but it's a very good question.
It's the closest physical star, even closer than Sirius, which is Sirius is my favorite. But yeah, it's kind of like a silent star out there that's so close yet so far away.
But that's a very good question. I mean, there must be stories and legends about it, I'm sure.
Yeah. It might be a new rabbit hole for you, Vance.
Yeah, well, you can't see it from the northern hemisphere. So that I think that has something to do with it because a lot of the astrological lore is sourced from people in the northern hemisphere, and people in the southern hemisphere, except for the doggone, of course, and I think they were kind of close to the equator, but they there wasn't as much activity.
You know, Vance, that's such an important point, and I've actually started a group where we've been trying to integrate more of the wisdom, the star wisdom coming out of the southern hemisphere, because our understanding of the stars and astrology and astronomy have been so dominated by those of us in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point. Well, awesome. Well, if nobody else in the audience has questions, I think Frank Sidebottom. Hey, Frank, what are you saying, Frank? Let me pull it up. The Galactic Center is a black hole, a black star whose event horizon is so bright that dark matter protects us from its radiation. Oh, it's not a question. I thought you had a question, but yeah, you're right. You're right, my friend. All right. Well, Heather, I have your website and your book linked on the show notes, regardless of where people are watching. Anywhere else you want to send people, or just go to your website? Where do you want to send people?
Go to my website, and I also have a YouTube channel, so those are good sites.
And you do, child, you sort of break down your book and the stars and the maps and all that?
Yeah, and do interviews and astrological updates.
Check it out. I'm sure it's very useful. Awesome. Well, we are at the end of this interstellar overdrive, as Sid Barrett called it. First, I'll say, Vance, thanks for keeping us company, and good luck with Alpha Centauri.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'll look into
a book
it.
report.
But it's been great cruising through the universe this morning, and good luck with your book and your endeavors, Heather.
Thank you so much. It's really been wonderful to be in this conversation with both of you.
We enjoyed it a lot, and so did the audience. Yeah, thank you, Heather. And thanks for being on the show, and good luck. Human consciousness and the transition depends on it, for sure. So everybody check out Astrological Ages and the Galactic Center, ancient wisdom for this time of transition. And yes, support AM Byte in any way you can. Become a member, like, subscribe. Looking for voiceover services, look me up. Let's keep growing this red pill cafeteria, and let's keep expanding consciousness. But I do appreciate you being here. You guys are going to do so many wonders, and you have it within you to make a difference and reach the stars. As Plato said, we are all stars. So until then, well, relax and have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Take care, everybody. Join the redeemed Archon Sabaoth on his fool's journey with the Gnostic Tarot. Learn about the journey of the Gnostic Jesus. Follow Mary Magdalene in her quest for forbidden knowledge. Experience the celestial majesty of Bar Below, the Supreme Mother. Commune with the invisible spirit, or the one of the Gnostics. Accompany the Gnostic sage Marcelina as she weaves primordial mysticism. Engage with Marcus the Magician and his coven of Gnostic witches. Experience the fall and liberation of Sophia in the simulation. Also discover the sagas of Abraxas, Simon Magus, Thunder, Valentinus, and more. In the end, see if Sabaoth and Sophia can unite to defeat the Demiurge. The Gnostic Tarot is perfect for divination and gnosis, the knowledge of the heart. Cast alchemical fire upon the world like Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas. Or grasp the mysteries of existence like Mary in the Gnostic Gospels.